They said I gave the dead a second voice. I used to believe them until that voice began answering back. Every poem I stole breathed like a living thing. The crowd clapped, and somewhere in the applause I swear I heard a heartbeat. Now I write again, alone in the dark, afraid to listen too closely to the echo of my own words. My name is Luciana Prado, though most people only know the signature, El Prado, scrawled beneath the poems that made me famous. I grew up in Recife, a city that smells of salt and sweat, where words rot faster than fruit. My father sold used books from a cart. My mother sang fado in bars too small to remember her name. From them, I inherited one thing, a belief that art could make poverty sound poetic. But poverty doesn't forgive poetry. By the time I turned 30, my first collection had already sunk without a ripple. Editors called me promising, which in Brazil means unpaid. I taught literature at a night school, grading essays that bled cliches, until one afternoon I found a journal in a flea market, a leather notebook the color of dried blood. Its spine was cracked, its pages soft with mold. Inside, verses in Portuguese so raw they smelled alive. They weren't mine, but they could have been. The vendor said it came from the belongings of a dead writer, someone half forgotten, his name fading from the ink stamp inside. João C. Nascimento. I bought it for the price of lunch and carried it home like a sin I didn't yet believe in. That night, I copied one stanza into my notebook, just to see if it still breathed. By morning, the rhythm had changed. The line felt heavier, fuller, almost aware. When my students read it aloud, they cried, and for the first time in years, I felt the city listening again. At first, I told myself it was homage. Every artist borrows, I thought. Some of us just borrow from the dead. That winter, the literary scene in Sao Paulo was starving. Bookstores were closing like old theaters. Poets traded fame for Instagram followers. I was teaching grammar to teenagers who thought Neruda was a coffee brand. Every night, I came home to the journal, his journal, lying open on my desk, like a patient waiting for confession. The handwriting was restless, ink spreading like veins. The words weren't finished. Many stopped mid-thought, as if death had interrupted mid-verse. I told myself I was completing him, translating him, saving him from oblivion. So I typed the first poem, word for word, and sent it to a small magazine under my name. 2 weeks later, they wrote back, "Brilliant." A voice, both ancient and urgent. Ancient, urgent. The words struck like lightning. For the first time in my life, I felt timeless. When the poem went viral, everything changed. Invitations flooded my inbox. Readings, interviews, festivals. The same critics who once ignored me now quoted my mystical realism, comparing me to Clarice Lispector and Neruda's ghost. Ghost. That word kept appearing. At first, I laughed it off, poetic coincidence. But each performance carried a strange electricity. The microphones crackled. The room felt colder. And once, while reading, I heard something behind the applause. A breath, faint but distinct, like someone finishing the line for me. I began to read his journal obsessively. Each night, I'd light a candle beside my desk and trace the fading ink with my fingers. João wrote about the sea, about loss, about a woman he called a voz ausente, the absent voice. His tone oscillated between despair and worship, as if he believed words could resurrect her. Sometimes, in the quiet, I whispered his unfinished lines aloud, and the strangest thing happened. The endings arrived, not in my mind, but in my mouth. Words I didn't remember writing, cadences that felt borrowed from another heartbeat. I told myself it was collaboration across time. That's how all poets work, isn't it? We're vessels, not thieves. The second poem came easier. Then the third. Each publication made me bolder. I began altering lines, rearranging stanzas, molding Joao's grief into my rhythm. Soon, no one could tell where his pain ended and mine began. The fame was intoxicating. Not the money, there wasn't much, but the recognition. The power of having strangers quote me online, tattoo my phrases, whisper my words to lovers in the dark. But the applause had a hunger. Each success demanded another offering. The journal was nearly empty now, only a dozen pages left. I began to dream of Joao. Not his face, just his breath. Sometimes it came as wind, rattling the papers on my desk. Other times, a whisper too soft to catch. I started leaving the window open at night. The curtains would move though the air was still. Once, I found the candle burned down to the wax, though I hadn't lit it. I began writing faster. The poems no longer felt like translation. They felt like possession. When my editor asked if I'd release a full collection, I said yes without hesitation. The title came to me in a dream. Songs from the Mouth of the Sea. That was Joao's phrase, not mine, but it fit. It always fit. The book launch was held in an old theater downtown. Chandeliers, velvet curtains, the scent of sweat and old perfume. Reporters filled the aisles. My face was projected on a screen behind me. When I read aloud, the room seemed to pulse. My voice echoed too richly, too full, as though the space itself were speaking with me. A journalist later wrote, her performance felt haunted, but holy. Haunted, but holy. The perfect review for a stolen soul. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't escape him. Everywhere I turned, fragments of Joao's life began surfacing. Newspaper clippings, essays, old recordings. He had died 30 years ago, penniless, unpublished. His daughter had donated his belongings to a university archive that never cataloged them. Somehow, one journal slipped through the cracks and ended up in that flea market. When I saw his photograph, black and white, hollow-eyed, a cigarette caught mid-thought, I felt something inside me collapse. He looked so alive I could almost hear him breathing. But it wasn't guilt that stopped me. It was fear. One evening, during a reading in Rio, I forgot the next line of my own poem. My mind went blank, and from somewhere deep inside my chest, a voice, not mine, finished it. The audience gasped. Some even clapped, thinking it was intentional. But I froze. My throat went dry. My hands trembled. That night, I locked the journal in a drawer. I told myself I'd stop, write my own words again, return to honesty. But silence is a cruel editor. Without Joao's voice, my pen felt dead. Every sentence broke apart. Every metaphor collapsed. The world went quiet, and for the first time, I realized I had no sound of my own. So I went back. Opened the drawer. Opened the journal. Only one poem remained unfinished. A final page, a single line scratched halfway. And when she speaks my name again, the ink stopped there as if waiting. I remember whispering, Joao. And the candle flared. I wrote the rest in one breath, my hand moving faster than thought. Let her remember I am not gone, only rewritten. When I looked at what I'd written, my heart stopped. The handwriting wasn't mine. The poem became my most famous piece. Awards followed, interviews, a documentary proposal. I smiled through it all, though every question felt like a confession I couldn't make. Where do your words come from, they asked. And I always answered, from silence. But I knew the truth. Silence had become the only thing I couldn't find anymore. I used to believe the applause was human. Now, I'm not sure. The year the book won the Aurora Prize, I was living in a rented apartment overlooking Copacabana, its windows always half open, the sea a constant whisper against the glass. People called me the revival of Brazilian poetry. Magazines photographed my desk, my hands, even the ink stains on my wrists, as if they were relics. But what they never saw, what I never showed, was the drawer. The journal still inside, wrapped in linen, pulsing faintly beneath my notes. Some nights I'd wake at 3 a.m. to the sound of pages turning. Once, I found the book open to a blank spread, the ink from my pen bleeding through it as though the paper had breathed it in. I tried to ignore it. I filled my days with panels, lectures, travel. Fame is the perfect exorcist. It drowns the ghosts in light. Until it doesn't. In Lisbon, during a poetry festival, I met Helena, a journalist working on a feature about the new Latin American truth-tellers. She asked if she could record an interview. Her voice was gentle but direct, the kind that disarms defenses. At one point she said, "Your verses feel inhabited. Do you ever sense they belong to someone else?" The question froze me. I laughed it off, of course. I said all art is borrowed breath. She smiled, but her recorder stayed on. Later that night, when I replayed the interview to check the audio, I heard something behind my voice. A faint echo, syllables out of sync, like another version of me whispering the same lines half a second too late. I closed the laptop, but in the silence that followed, I heard it again. One word, exhaled through static. Mine. I began sleeping less. The candle by my desk burned all night. Shadows moved where nothing should. I wrote feverishly, essays, speeches, new poems, anything to outrun that voice. But the more I produced, the emptier it all sounded. My metaphors were hollow, my imagery mechanical. The critics called it evolution. Inside, I called it decay. The ghost of creation had become my addiction. I no longer wrote to express. I wrote to hear him breathe. When the documentary crew came, I let them in. They wanted authenticity, the poet at work. So I sat by the window, pretending to write, pretending the lines were mine. One cameraman pointed at the old journal on my shelf. "Is that where you draft your work?" I froze. He reached for it, and before I could think, I shouted, "Don't touch that." The room fell silent. He apologized, confused. I smiled, said it was a family heirloom, and changed the subject. But after they left, I opened the journal and found something new written inside. "You let them see me." The ink was fresh. My agent said the next step was translation. English, French, Arabic, she said. "You'll be eternal." Eternal. That word made me sick. I agreed anyway. The translators called daily with questions about meaning. Each time, I lied. I told them the metaphors were deliberate, the structure intentional, the voice purely mine. But every time they spoke Joao's words aloud in another language, I felt him stir, like I'd given him a new tongue. The night the English edition launched, I stood before a crowd in London, reading a poem I hadn't touched in months. The room smelled of damp stone and rain. As I reached the final stanza, the microphone screeched and the lights flickered out. In the dark, someone whispered, "You promised me breath." The audience thought it was performance art. They applauded in the dark. I never read publicly again. After London, the nightmares began. In them, I was in Joao's room, the same desk, the same window, the same candle burning to nothing. Each time I tried to leave, I saw my own books on his shelves, my face replacing his in photographs. When I woke, I'd find salt on my lips, as if I'd been near the sea. One night, I woke to find the journal lying open beside me, though I'd locked it away. The page was wet. I realized the words were written in seawater. You took her voice. Give it back. Her voice. The voz ausente. The absent woman he'd written about. It hit me then. Maybe it wasn't Joao haunting me. Maybe it was her, the one he'd written for, the one I'd erased by speaking her lines. I stopped writing altogether. I told my publisher I was taking a sabbatical, citing burnout, grief, spiritual exhaustion. Words that sound noble when spoken by the successful, but the silence was worse than the noise. Without the writing, I began hearing everything. The hum of refrigerators, the buzz of streetlights, the pulse in my own wrist. Every sound seemed to shape itself into rhythm, into language. Once, in the middle of the night, I found myself standing at the window, whispering Joao's unfinished line again and again. And when she speaks my name again. Only this time, another voice, a woman's, finished it from the dark. He will know he was never hers. I screamed. The window shattered. But when I looked out, the street below was empty. That was the moment I realized the poems weren't dead things. They were living debts. Every verse taken, every applause received, a contract written in the language of ghosts. So I did what all cowards do. I doubled down. I returned to my editor with a new manuscript, not Joao's words this time, mine, or what I thought were mine. I called it Inheritance, but the moment I read it aloud, it sounded wrong, clumsy, false, like someone else trying to speak through my throat. My editor smiled politely and said, "It's beautiful," but her eyes said, "You've lost it." She was right. I spent the following months drifting through readings, art residencies, airports. I wore black, quoted Rilke, pretended I was evolving beyond fame. But every city felt like the same stage, same sea, same echo. Once, at a hotel in Barcelona, I found a note slipped under my door. No name, no address. Just a single line written in familiar ink. You made him live again. Now let him die. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I took a taxi to the port. I carried the journal wrapped in a scarf, its weight both sacred and diseased. I thought of throwing it into the sea, to return it to wherever Joao had been waiting. But as I stood there, the wind rose and I heard it again. The applause, not from people, but from the waves. Every crash against the rocks sounded like clapping hands. I couldn't do it. I turned back. That night the dream changed. Joao was standing behind me, his face finally visible, pale, exhausted, a man half made of mist and ink. He said nothing. He only held out the journal. I woke with tears on my face and the faint scent of salt in the air. On my desk, a single new page. You cannot write the living without killing the dead again. I tore it out, burned it, but the smoke rose in patterns that looked like letters curling into my breath. In those days, fame still followed me, but I no longer followed it back. My words had become a language of penance, each line another confession in disguise. But I wasn't ready to confess, not yet. That would come later, after she found me. The message came on a Tuesday when the sea sounded tired and the ceiling fan learned a new rattle. I'm his daughter. I know what you've done. I am in Rio. No signature, no threat, just gravity suddenly localized inside my chest. I answered like a coward. Who? As if there were any other him left in my life. Her second text was a photograph, Joao's journal, the cover split along the spine, my fingerprints on the linen wrap like bruises. The angle of the photo told me she was below my building. My throat went dry with the mineral taste of fear. I didn't look out the window. I sat very still, as if silence could make me invisible. There was a knock. I opened the door because I didn't know how not to. She stood there with the posture of a verdict. Early 30s, light brown skin, hair pulled back, eyes that had learned to read the weather on people. When she said her name, Marina Nascimento, the apartment lost a few inches of air. "May I come in?" she asked, and it sounded like, "May I enter the wound?" I stepped aside. She didn't sit. She walked to the shelf. Her gaze skipped my awards, the framed covers, the hotel lobby bouquets dried into brown hands. It went straight to the drawer. Her fingers hovered, as if a magnet lived inside the wood. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. "Do you believe in haunting, Miss Prado?" she asked. "I believe in literature," I said, my worst answer, my oldest armor. She nodded, as if I had just confessed to the wrong crime. Then she took the journal from her tote. Another one, not Joao's, but a twin in leather, younger, almost new. She opened it to a page of careful penmanship, a poem, dated a year after his death. "My father wrote for my mother, and when she died, he wrote for me," she said. "These are the versions he read aloud at home. The versions you changed." She held the book like a child. I could see fingerprints, smudges of kitchen oil, a dried ring from a glass, a life attached to each line. She read 2 stanzas in a voice without theatricality. The words were simple and exact. They were not the ones I had published. I recognized the bone structure, but not the face. "I restored him," I heard myself say. "I didn't," she cut me off with a small shake of the head. "You made him fashionable," she said, not unkindly. "You made him visible by removing the parts of him that made him ours." I wanted to cry. I wanted to confess. I wanted to hate her. Instead, I said, "If I hadn't, no one would know he existed. And if you hadn't," she replied, "I could still read him without hearing you breathing through his mouth." The sentence stripped the room. We stood in the quiet, like 2 people sharing a mirror. I wanted to explain the flea market, the mold, the sensation of the candle breathing, the collaboration across time. I wanted to tell her how the words had arrived in my mouth, whole and wet and pulsating, and how I had mistaken that miracle for consent. Instead, I asked, "What do you want?" "The book," she said, and glanced at the drawer. "All of it. And for the next words you published to be yours." I unlocked the drawer. The journal lay there as if it had been waiting to be chosen by the right hand. When I lifted it, the linen felt warm. I placed it on the table between us. She didn't take it. "Not yet," she said. "Look." She slipped a photograph from her tote, a picture of a kitchen table in a small apartment. On it, a cassette player. Next to it, a tape labeled "A voz ausente," Marina, in Joao's handwriting. "My father recorded us," she said. "Reading, talking, sleeping. He said the poems needed ordinary air." I felt my knees weaken. Ordinary air. That was the element I had removed, polishing him into cathedral oxygen. She pressed play on a small digital recorder. A hiss, a clink of dishes, then a voice. Joao's, younger than his photographs, warmer than my performances, reading a line I had turned into thunder. Here it was a whisper, almost embarrassed by its own beauty. After a pause, a girl giggled. "Pai, você esqueceu a parte do sorvete. Dad, you forgot the part about the ice cream. I closed my eyes. I had cut the ice cream. Too mundane, I'd thought. Too mortal. When I opened them, Marina was studying me. You don't need my forgiveness, she said, as if translating my thoughts. You need your own. Those are the hardest, I said. It came out as a plea. She nodded. There's a festival tonight. Everyone will be there. If you want to start there. Her plan felt like execution. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, she said. He breathed loud, my father. The doctor said it was nothing. I hear it when I sleep. If you hear it, it doesn't mean he's angry. It means he's alive somewhere. Be careful with the living. After she left, I stood alone with 2 journals on the table and an apartment full of applauses that no longer clapped for me. I didn't write that afternoon. I listened to the fan, to the gulls, to my chest. The breath I heard wasn't supernatural. It was mine, ragged around the edges of shame. Night arrived with stadium lights and moths. I walked to the festival with both journals in a cloth bag, grief tucked under my arm like a program. The plaza was loud and democratic. Kids on skateboards, old women weaving through lines with the mechanical grace of saints. A makeshift stage, a banner with my face printed too large, my eyes airbrushed to a sincerity I didn't recognize. Backstage, my agent hugged me like a tactic. We'll read the new one, she whispered. Close big. Don't mention the rumors. Her perfume smelled like peaches and crisis. I stepped to the microphone, and the crowd gathered into focus, 1,000 faces forming a single eye. The sea behind them watched, black and intimate. I have something to say, I began. The sound system crackled, then steadied. I felt my throat narrow, the old muscle memory of performance taking control, the part of me that survived by pleasing. I reached into the bag and held up Joao's journal. A breeze moved across the crowd, as if the book had exhaled. This is not mine, I said. These words made me famous. They also do not belong to me. Silence is a living thing. It crawled over the plaza and perched on shoulders. I could hear the plastic flit of banners, the wet syllables of the tide. I started reading, not the versions I'd published, but the ones Marina had played for me, the ones with ice cream and ordinary air. I read his hesitations, honored his commas, let the line breaks fall where his breath had insisted. The poem changed as I spoke. It softened. It stopped trying to be eternal and became, for a moment, human. Halfway through, my voice failed. Not theatrically, just a small, ordinary collapse. I swallowed. A sound followed. Not applause, not wind. A low, familiar breathing. It didn't scare me. It steadied me. I finished the poem with my voice and someone else's lungs. Then I told the truth. Not every detail, not every sin, but enough. The flea market, the homage that metastasized, the festivals, the drawer, the breath. There were no boos. Worse, there was administration. People scrolled. My agent stared like a locked phone. A blogger whispered to a camera. A woman in the second row cried soundlessly. I closed the journal. I'm returning this, I said. And I will write again. Slowly. Probably badly. The laugh that came back was merciful, then unsure. I left the stage to the sound of my name turning into a headline. Backstage, the agent hissed. You just killed a career. I nodded. Maybe I saved a person. Buy the person a drink, she snapped. The career paid for the drinks. By the time I reached the street, the first article was up. Plagiarist or priestess. Photos of my hand on the journal. My face in the act of apology. My phone bloomed with messages. Some tender, some forensic. Some dressed as forgiveness, but hungry for more confession. Marina waited at the corner, shadow tucked around her like a shawl. I handed her the journal. Thank you, she said. Her voice contained both burial and birth. I don't know what to do tomorrow, I admitted. good, she smiled. A small, exhausted crescent. Then you might actually choose. We parted without drama. I walked home along the edge of the sea, where the city hands the dark its jewelry. A boy played a tinny radio. A couple argued in soft knives. A dog shook itself dry and baptized my shoes. When I reached the apartment, it felt larger, hollowed by the missing book. I set the second journal, Marina's, on the table like a loan. I made tea. I didn't drink it. I lay on the couch and waited for sleep, as if it were a bus that might not stop. At 2 a.m., a ping, another message. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., office, editor. A second ping. If you confess in full, we can salvage. If you resist, we litigate. Publisher, counsel. A third ping I didn't expect. I heard the reading. I heard him too. You're not crazy, but you will be if you keep pretending. Helena. I stared at the ceiling, where the fan drew circles around my choices. Outside, the sea rehearsed its endless applause. I closed my eyes. In the quiet, a breath, mine, his, ours, approached my ear like a tide deciding where to break. It said my name, and then morning arrived without color. The light through my curtains looked like someone trying not to wake me. On the table lay the last remnants of what I had called a life. My notebooks, the linen wrap that once held Joao's journal, and Marina's quiet text. He was listening last night. I wanted to believe that meant forgiveness, but forgiveness is never that kind. It only waits for honesty to finish speaking. At 10, I walked into the publisher's office. The building smelled of disinfectant and bureaucracy. My editor sat behind glass, flanked by a lawyer who didn't look up when I entered. The walls were decorated with framed magazine covers, my face among them, all sharp cheekbones and borrowed sincerity. She gestured for me to sit. "You can make this easier," she said. "By lying better?" I asked. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We're not interested in moral debate, Ms. Prado. We're interested in minimizing loss." Loss. Such a cold word for something burning so brightly inside me. I opened Marina's journal, the one she'd left with me. "These are his real poems," I said. "Not the ones I changed. The ones that loved without performance." The editor leaned forward. "You're not here to moralize, Luciana. You're here to salvage." I smiled, small and tired. "No, I'm here to surrender." I slid the journal across the table. The pages fluttered, whispering through the air like wings learning to forget their purpose. "Publish it," I said. "Under his name. All proceeds to the family." The lawyer blinked. "Do you understand what that means for your career?" "Yes," I said. "It means it's finally mine again." They signed the papers that afternoon. By evening, the story had broken. Famed poet confesses to plagiarizing dead writer. The networks ran my photo beside Joao's, as if comparing ghosts. My inbox filled with invitations to speak about redemption, art ethics, the psychology of guilt. I declined them all. Some mistakes should be allowed to echo without a microphone. For weeks, I didn't write. I sat by the window, watching the city rot beautifully into rain. I read Joao's lines from Marina's copy, not to copy them, but to understand the anatomy of sincerity. He wrote as if each word were a pulse, not decoration, not performance, just survival. One night, I lit a candle and tried to write a single sentence of my own. My hand shook. The page remained blank for hours. Then, without meaning to, I wrote, "I once stole a man's silence and called it song. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't publishable, but it was mine." I cried harder than I had in years. A month later, Marina called. "They printed his book," she said. "We're having a small reading. You should come." I hesitated. "Do you want me there?" "I think he would," she said. "You made people listen. Maybe now they'll hear him." At the event, no cameras waited, no banners, no applause. Just a circle of folding chairs, the scent of coffee, the kind of room where voices can rest. When Marina read her father's poems, I listened with my eyes closed. Each line felt cleaner, lighter, like something returned to its natural gravity. When she finished, she handed me a sheet of paper. "Read this," she said. It was blank. I looked up, confused. She smiled. "That's your page now." I keep that page above my desk. It stares at me like a question I'm learning to live with. I write slower now, painfully, deliberately. I let silence speak first. Sometimes it says nothing. Sometimes it says wait. And sometimes, when the wind brushes the curtains and the candle trembles, I still hear it, the faintest breath. But it no longer feels like haunting. It feels like company. They call it scandal. I call it resurrection. Because to be rewritten by truth is not to die. It's to finally speak without stealing someone else's lungs. The sea has changed color since the last time I wrote about it. It used to sound like applause. Now it sounds like breathing. Slow. Imperfect. Alive. It's been a year since the confession. The newspapers found another scandal. The festivals found new prodigies. My name still drifts through gossip columns now and then, usually followed by "the one who stole from the dead." At first that hurt. Then, strangely, it started to fit. Like a scar that stops throbbing once it becomes part of the skin. I live quietly now in Paraji, a coastal town that smells of rain and roasted coffee. My neighbors don't ask about poetry. They ask about the weather, the price of fish, the stray cat that sleeps under my chair. I teach a small workshop at the community center, writing for listening. Most of my students aren't writers at all. A fisherman who wants to write letters to his daughter in prison. A retired nurse who keeps a diary for her husband's memory loss. A teenage boy who doesn't speak much but draws the rhythm of his sentences in pencil before he writes them. When they ask for advice, I tell them, write as if no one will read it, but someone will feel it. That's what João did. That's what I forgot. Sometimes tourists still recognize me. They approach hesitantly, like touching an artifact they're not sure is sacred or cursed. "You're the poet," they say. "The one with the ghost." I smile. "Yes," I tell them. "He writes better than I do." They laugh, not sure if it's a joke. I keep one candle on my desk, not as ritual, as reminder. Its flame is small, steady, untheatrical, the kind of light you use to find your way to the bathroom at night, not to summon gods. I've learned that art doesn't have to be salvation. Sometimes it's just a form of endurance, a way to stay human while the world demands spectacle. A few months ago, a letter arrived from Helena, the journalist. No greeting, no signature, just a typed note. "We are all plagiarists of the living. The trick is to return what we borrow while it still has breath." I folded it and placed it inside my notebook. It felt like something João might have said. Or perhaps Marina. Or perhaps it was the part of me that had been silent for too long, finally learning to speak. When I write now, I no longer chase perfection. I chase presence. Some days I sit for hours without a single line worth keeping. Other days a sentence appears, fragile but true. The other morning I wrote this: "Forgiveness isn't a door. It's a window you learn to open slowly, so the air doesn't startle you." That one, I think, I'll keep. Marina visits sometimes. We drink black coffee and talk about books, mostly hers. She's writing a biography of her father now. The breath between words. She asked me to write the foreword. At first I said no. It didn't feel right. But she insisted. It's not about redemption, she said. It's about witness. So I wrote it. 2 pages. Not an apology, a testimony. I ended it with this line. Every voice needs an echo to find its shape. I was his echo. Now, at last, I've learned how to listen. When I sent it to her, she didn't reply for a week. Then one message. He would have smiled. That was enough. At night, I still dream of words, not mine, not his, just syllables floating in water, dissolving before I can catch them. I wake up calm, not afraid anymore of what disappears. Not everything has to be written to be real. The last time I visited Joao's grave, I brought no flowers, no poems, just silence. I placed my hand on the stone and said softly, "Thank you for letting me borrow your breath." The wind rose gently, as if agreeing. When I turned to leave, I realized I no longer felt haunted. I felt accompanied. Sometimes I think about the day in the flea market, the way the sunlight hit that old journal, the way I mistook its dust for destiny. If I could go back, I wouldn't pick it up. But I also wouldn't erase what came after, because sin in art isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's the road that forces you to see what truth actually costs. And truth, when it finally arrives, never knocks. It walks straight through the walls you built with your lies and sits down quietly beside you. Then it asks, "Can you still write knowing this?" And you say, "Yes, but slower." Tonight, the rain begins again. The sea breathes against the rocks. I open my notebook and light the candle. For a moment, the flame flickers. Once, twice, then steadies. No voice answers this time. No applause. Just silence, deep and merciful. And I write, "To live without stealing the dead is harder than fame, but softer than guilt. And maybe that's all redemption is.